Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pumpkin dinner rolls. That's right, have you ever been eating a batch of freshly made dinner rolls and thought to yourself, these are really good, but I wish they had taken longer to make and look like little pumpkins? Well, probably not. But after watching this video, that could actually happen. And while it is true these are a little more labor intensive, those looks of wonderment and smiles on your guests' faces more than make it worthwhile. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with this very simple dough. And that'll begin with some warm milk. Okay, not room temperature, not hot, somewhere in between. And then over that, we will sprinkle 1 package of dry active yeast, plus a tablespoon or so of honey. Right, exactly how much depends on how sweet you want these, but generally a holiday dinner roll should have a little bit of sweetness to it. And then we're also going to want to add a generous amount of melted butter, preferably from cows that ate grass for a living. And then we will go ahead and give that a quick stir before finishing this up with our flour. And as usual, we will hold a little bit back so we can knead that in later. All right, if you only remember one thing from this video, it's that you should never add the entire amount of flour called for in a recipe. And then last but not least, we will add our salt, and that's it. We'll go ahead and take our most experienced wooden spoon and start stirring all this together. And we will keep stirring until we formed almost a dough. All right, so we want everything to sort of pull together, but it's still going to be way too sticky to knead, which is exactly what we want. Because what we'll do when it does reach that stage is go ahead and transfer that onto our work surface, onto which we sprinkled the rest of our flour. And we will start kneading, which is not going to be easy right away since this is so sticky. But as that dough picks up the flour on the surface, it will become less sticky and smoother and more elastic. And if everything goes according to plan, eventually we will end up with a very soft, fairly elastic, but not too sticky dough. And by the way, if your dough has picked up all that flour on the surface and it's still sticky, just sprinkle over some more, and then keep sprinkling until it's just right. And one of the great clues you've added enough flour is that the dough will stop smearing and sticking onto your fingers and the surface, which is exactly what's happened here. And at this point, we should be able to shape this into a ball of dough that holds its shape and stays nice and round and sits up nice and perky. And when we give it a push with our fingers, that dough springs back. So that is looking just about perfect. And once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and transfer that into a lightly buttered bowl. And then we'll cover it and let it sit in a warm place for about an hour and a half or until it doubles in size. And then while we're waiting for that to happen, the other prep we could do would be to cut some pieces of string about 8 to 10 inches long. And we're going to need 4 per roll. And once those are cut, we'll transfer them into a bowl and toss them in a little bit of vegetable oil. And we just need enough to coat. And I have no idea why I poured so much in. All right, because if you're tossing these and the oil is flying out of the bowl, you added too much. But anyway, we'll go ahead and coat our pieces of kitchen string in some oil, at which point we'll simply set those aside until we're ready to bind our balls of dough. And then assuming our dough's risen, we can go ahead and proceed to the next step. And by the way, I forgot to mention I did butter the foil to cover this with, just to prevent sticking. But anyway, what we'll do is go ahead and deflate our dough, and then transfer it to our table and sort of press it down into some kind of uniform shape. And thanks to this dough having so much butter in it, we probably don't have to flour the surface, but if for whatever reason yours is sticking, go ahead. And then once this was pressed down, I went ahead and split it in half. Since this recipe is going to make 12 portions, but to make the filming a little easier, I'm only going to do 6. And I actually saved that other half for some Danish experiments. And then what we'll do once we've cut this into some hopefully equal-sized pieces is roll each piece into a nice round ball. And we do that by cupping our hand over the dough. And then we just sort of press it lightly and use a circular motion. And if you do that for about 10 or 15 seconds, you should end up with something that's beautifully round and relatively smooth. So I did that to all 6 of my portions. At which point we're going to cover these and let them rest for 15 minutes. And if you don't have a bowl, you could use a kitchen towel or some lightly oiled plastic wrap. And then once our dough has rested for about 15 minutes, we can proceed to tie it up. And to accomplish that, we will place 4 pieces of string down as shown, making sure that point in the center where they all come together is very precise. And then we'll go ahead and transfer our dough on with the smoothest side down. And then one at a time, we'll take each string and tie it together using a simple square knot at the top. And while we do want it fairly snug against the dough, we don't want to do it too tight where it's actually cutting into the dough. And then once we've made that knot at the top, we'll go ahead and snip off the excess. And I know, it looks like we're wasting string and we could have made these shorter, but oiled string is fairly hard to handle, So having a little bit of extra string does make things easier. And by the way, there's 2 ways you can do this. The slow but easy way, which is what we're using here, or the fast hard way, where you take one piece of string and you wrap that around making one knot at the top. But I really do think this method, even though it takes a little longer, looks a lot better once they're baked. But anyway, I'll explain more about that in the blog post, and it's really up to you to decide how to tie these. I mean, you are, after all, the Mata-Hari of your dinner roll shibari. And once you get the swing of things, this really does not take that long. Oh, and one word of warning. If your sections didn't come out perfectly even, do not try to adjust it. Okay, it's human nature to want to grab that string and try to move it over, but that will not work. So as you're tying these, try to get them as equally spaced as you can. And as we finish these, we'll go ahead and transfer those onto a Silpat line baking sheet with the knot side down. Okay, very important, knot side down. All right, so I went ahead and did that to all 6 of mine, which really only took me about 10 minutes. It just seemed like much longer. And then what we'll do once all our dough balls have been bound and panned is simply let them sit in a warm spot for about 30 minutes or so, which is when all the magic happens. Because what's going to happen as these sit and that dough expands is that thanks to our perfectly positioned strings, we're going to end up with what we call in the business cleavage. Check it out. And of course, once these are baked, that's going to give them their beautiful little pumpkin look. And then to finish these off, we're going to do 2 things, both optional. One would be to sift a little bit of flour over the top to sort of give them that dusty dinner roll look I like. And also, if we want, we could take a little bit of extra dough and sort of roughly form it into these little stem-like shapes. And by the way, I've seen versions of this where for the stem people will use things like pecans or some pumpkin seeds. But personally, I think the dough looks better. And these really do only take a few seconds to shape. And that's it. Once all that's set, these are ready to transfer into the center of a 375-degree oven for about 25 minutes or until lightly browned and looking like the most adorable thing you've ever seen. Oh yeah, the cuteness factor here is off the charts. And then to finish these, what we'll have to do is remove the string, but we have to let them cool before you do that. All right, not all the way, but wait till they're at least warm. Otherwise, you'll probably crush them. And once they have cooled down, what we'll do is take our scissors and cut through all 4 pieces of string at the top, at which point we will carefully peel down and remove those strings. And yes, I did practice on the first 5 before filming this last one. And what I learned is make sure you pull down all the way as far as you can go before flipping it over and then pulling out that knot. All right, so go slow and be careful. But because we oiled that string first, it really does come out pretty easily. And that's it. Once the strings are gone, we'll go ahead and cut a little hole in the top, into which we will place our stems. And it was right here that I made my biggest mistake. Because what I realized later is that the stem is the thickest where it attaches to the pumpkin, and then it tapers off. So technically, I am putting these in upside down. But anyway, I'm probably overthinking that. And as I transfer those onto a rosemary lined platter, I really did think they looked great. And trust me, so will your guests. And of course, as I always like to remind folks when we do something like this, it does not matter how pretty or cool something looks if it doesn't also taste amazing. And thanks to a fairly classic dinner roll dough, these really did. All right, these are very light and buttery with just a hint of sweetness, and would pair perfectly with any of your holiday menus. And above and beyond serving these as a super cool looking side, we could actually slice these open and use them for a seasonal slider, like maybe a citrus-infused pork and fennel sausage, or maybe a little dried cranberry studded turkey burger. That would be cool. Oh, and in related news, I may have just coined the term seasonal slider. But anyway, whether you use these to make gorgeous little sandwiches, or just as a good old-fashioned delicious to eat and gorgeous to look at dinner roll, either way, I really do hope you give these a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.